Today I'll show you how to create this easy cascading balloon garland, and it all starts with inflating two 11-inch balloons anywhere between 7 and 9 inches in diameter. Press them against the table so that they're nice and round, and then tie them in a pair. Wrap the nozzle from one balloon around the other nozzle twice, and then tie them in a simple knot. This will create our first pair. Make two more pairs in the exact same way, and then we're going to join them together into a cluster of 6 balloons by overlapping two of those pairs so that the nozzles touch right in the center, and then twist one balloon from each of those pairs around each other, locking them into a quad. To this quad, you're going to add that third pair by slipping it in so all the nozzles touch, and then twist one balloon from that pair around one of the balloons that's already in the cluster, and that will join them all together into our cluster of 6. The entire design is made up of these bubbly clusters. I'm going to join 4 of these clusters together in a garland using an empty 260 balloon. Tie the end of that 260 to the nozzles of the first cluster by pinching them together, pulling the 260 tight, and wrapping it in a figure 8 pattern around 2 of those balloons, and that will secure them together. Now you're going to take your next cluster of balloons and nestle it right up against the first, pulling that empty 260 balloon up through the center of this new cluster, and then wrapping it in a figure 8 pattern around a couple of balloons. Tie 2 more clusters to this garland in the exact same way, and because I'm using a mixed color scheme, I want to pay close attention to the balloon colors I'm setting right next to each other so I don't get a large section of one color. Now once you get to the end, you're going to take a nozzle from that final cluster of 6 and tie it to the remaining 260 balloon tail in a double knot, and that will keep all these balloons secured nicely together. I made a second garland just like this one, and that will make up the main body of my cascade of balloons. But we need a structure to build this balloon display on, and I'm using this 5-foot tall scalloped foam core arch, which I have a template available if you'd like to cut out and make one for yourself. To give this design some stability, you can either put a small sandbag through the hole in the support flap, or you can use some clear packaging tape or black gaff tape to secure the flap to the floor so our design doesn't shimmy around as we add the balloons to this structure. I want all of my balloons to come cascading through the center of the arch, and to hold them in place, I'm going to use these binder clips and attach it to the foam core arch, and then tie another empty 260 balloon to the handles of the binder clip by simply tying it in a double knot, and then using the tails of that 260 balloon to anchor my garland in place. Take your first balloon garland and bend it so there's a slight curve in it and place it into the center of the arch. Then you're going to take one of those empty 260 balloon tails and wrap it around one of the balloons that's right in front of it. This should be about a third of the way in to the garland, and that way most of the garland is poking up through the center of the arch. Once you wrap that around a couple times, let the tail go and it'll disappear into the balloons while continuing to hold the garland in place. Now on top of this, I want to extend that swooping motion. So I'm going to take the second mini balloon garland and tie the end of this garland to the end of the first garland. Now you could always make one long garland to start with, but I have found that it's much easier to transport and work with balloon garlands when they're in smaller sections. Once you have one large garland, I'm going to make sure the upper section of this garland is behind the arch and arrange it into a smooth sloping motion from the back left corner of the arch down through the center, and then out in front of the arch and swooping to the right. Once I'm happy with where it's placed, I'm going to add another binder clip in 260 to the top back side of my arch and secure the balloon garland in place. Now I want to flare out the base of this design by tying in a couple extra clusters. So take your empty 260 balloon, tie it to the center of your cluster, and then nestle this first cluster on the front underside of the garland so it starts to create a Y shape at the bottom. Once you're happy with where it's sitting, stretch that 260 and wrap it around a balloon or 2 that's already in the garland, and then bring it back and wrap it around a balloon or 2 of that cluster, and this will secure the 2 together. Now you're going to have a lot of extra 260 tail on this, so I'm going to use that remaining 260 tail to tie on another cluster at the very front and center sitting on the floor. Wrap it around a couple times and then tie the tail of that 260 to another place in the garland, and that will keep these 2 new clusters secured in place. I also want to fill out the mid section so that way the center of the arch looks like it's bursting with balloons. So I'm going to add one cluster behind the arch and one cluster in front of the arch so it looks nice and full, and then finish off the cascade with one final cluster at the very front for added length. With the main balloon shape in place, I now want to fill in holes and add a little bit more texture using 5-inch balloons. So I'm going to inflate 4 of these to 4 pumps of air with a hand pump, or about 4.5 inches in diameter. Inflate the first one, tuck the nozzle of that one under your fingers holding the pump while you inflate a second one to the exact same size, press them against the table so they're nice and round, and then tie them into pairs just like we did our larger balloons. Now once you have 2 of these pairs, we then want to tie them into a quad by nestling all of the nozzles together in the center and then twisting one balloon from each of those pairs around each other, locking them into that quad. I'm going to nestle these across the design and secure them in place using a simple rubber band. Simply slip that rubber band over one of the balloons in the little cluster, and then you're going to take that remaining rubber band and stretch it around one of the balloons that's already in the design next to where you want these little balloons to sit. Make sure the rubber band is sitting against the nozzles of the balloon so it's hidden from sight, and then you can play around with the placement of those small balloons until you're happy with where they're sitting. These little balloon clusters play a couple key roles when it comes to balloon design. First, it allows us to finesse the overall shape of the design. By adding these in certain places along the edges, we can subtly change the way the balloons are swooping and sitting. They're also imperative for filling in holes or gaps we might have in the garland. For instance, there's a large hole in the center here, and I don't want you to be able to see that green backdrop through the balloons. So by layering on all these small balloons, you can fill that in and get a beautiful fluffy texture. Next, I want to bring in some theming elements. So I made these bright red paper airplanes, and I'm going to attach them across the garland using glue dashes. So I'm going to hold the paper airplane where I think I want it to sit, and then see where that airplane is touching any of the balloons behind it, and that's where I'm going to place those glue dashes. Remove the paper backing and then stick the airplane back where you had it. I'm going to attach these all across the balloon garland, pointing to that top left corner so it looks like they're all taking off in the same direction. If you'd also like to make a cascading balloon design, I have all the supplies I used linked in the description box below, including the cutout template for the scalloped arch. So until the next time, remember, stay creative, everybody!